The EMD GP9. Some people actually called me out for not including this in the first part, and I get you. That's a fair assessment. Built between 1954 and 1959 by General Motors Electromotive Division, the GP9s were a sensational success when it came to American diesel innovation. At a time when most railways were transitioning out of steam and onto diesels, the GP9 helped solidify how good and efficient diesel power could be on the rails. They were built mainly for freight service, but they've seen uses all over the place, across North and South America. Over 4,000 GP9s were produced, and many of them are actually still in service, whether it be in their original form, in preservation, or rebuilt. There's multiple different rebuilds of GP9s, such as the GP15Cs, or the GP9RM that are still in use by Canadian National. 23 are officially in preservation in various places, and they're actually used a lot in railroad museums because of their efficiency. Sometimes for excursion trains or just to move stuff around. They're good locomotives, and I think the fact that they're still being used after nearly 70 years should speak for itself. EMD F40PH. Yes, this is another one that people question why I didn't include it, and to be honest, it was just too obvious because I've brought this one up before in several different videos because it really turned out to be one of the best diesels ever produced for a variety of reasons. The F40PH started production in 1975, and it was intended for use by Amtrak, but specifically their short-haul passenger routes. These diesels were not meant for long-distance trips because, at the time, Amtrak was introducing the SDP-40Fs, as well as the Pooches, to encompass a long-distance trip role. Except that both of those actually didn't work at all. The P-40Fs couldn't stop trying to run off the rails, and the Pooches broke every 12 seconds of operation. That's an exaggeration, but my point is they broke a lot. They were completely inefficient. So Amtrak was kind of stuck. They'd spent all this money on these diesels, and two of them weren't working. The rest of their fleet was pretty old and sometimes incompatible, and even some of their electric units, the GEE-60s, weren't operating appropriately. Might throw that on the worst of list someday, but we'll talk about that some other time. The point is, the only thing they really had left that they could use was the F40PH, but it wasn't designed for that purpose. Could they really expect it to work long distance? Well, apparently yes. They were exceptional, phenomenal. They easily transitioned into the backbone of Amtrak's passenger network, and they used them for decades. Not only was it a commercial success for Amtrak, but it also became a PR success, as the F40PHs became instantly synonymous with Amtrak. If you saw one, you knew what company it was. They became recognizable as an American mainstay. And in fact, it's arguable that without the F40PH's success, Amtrak may not have lasted, and who knows where the passenger rail network would be in America at this point. This diesel really put in the work when it was needed, but nothing lasts forever, and they did eventually age to the point that Amtrak felt the need to replace them. At first, they supplemented them with General Electric Dash 8s, which are actually great diesels on their own. I might include that on the list someday. And inevitably, the Genesis series, which was of course meant to be the new face of Amtrak. And those have been remarkably successful, don't get me wrong, but it was a shame to see the F40PHs go. Their last run with Amtrak was in 2001 and they were officially retired, but at least 3 entered preservation in America, and some of them are actually still in service, just not with Amtrak. They're currently with Via Rail in Canada. Only recently has Via Rail started phasing their own F40PHs out with more Genesis units that they're getting from Amtrak, but still, the F40PH is still, as of now, on the rails in service, and I think we can call that a win overall. The British Rail Class 8. No. Calm down. Deep breaths, remember what your therapist said. It's only a logo. It's not even really real. It was a corporation. They went defunct. They can't hurt you. It just feels that way. But it's all in your head. Just let it go. Just let it go. Okay. The Class 8 diesel may be a little familiar to some of you, and that is because they are the basis for the Thomas the Tank Engine character, Diesel. Yes, that really was just his name. It really was just called Diesel. They didn't even give him an original name. I mean, at least Boko's name was a little reversed, and Mavis had her own name. I mean, come on, guys. Despite the fact that Diesel may have given you the impression that the Class 8s are evil, because he was kind of a jerk, just all the time, the Class 8s actually were incredibly good at what they did. And in fact, several other classes, the Class 9 and Class 10, were derivatives of the Class 8. The Class 9 had a different gearing system to allow it to be a bit faster, and Class 10 had different engines and transmissions. And in fact, the Class 11s also look very similar, but that's because the 8s were based on the 11s, because they were out of order, and I'm not even worried about it. Anyway, nearly 1,000 of these little devils were produced for British Rail, and there's a good reason for that. Now, they couldn't go very fast, only up to about 15 miles per hour, and that was at the high end. They were not fast at all, but they more than made up for it in significant tractive effort for their size. They were shunters, some of the best shunters that British Railways ever saw. So good, in fact, that they are still in use literally right now. You may think it's weird that I'm putting a British Rail diesel that was built in the 50s or 60s, because I may have given the impression that they never produced anything good during that time. Now, for the most part, that's kind of true. But there are exceptions, as I keep reiterating, and the Class 8's one of those exceptions. These little guys have been a mainstay in every single rail yard all across the UK, and it was only recently that they started dealing down the number of them, because they did make a great deal, like way too many, if we're being honest. A few were exported, but most were scrapped, though 100 still remain in service as of now, with a handful converted to Class 9s or Class 13s, which is another diesel that looks just like these. There's so many of these little box designs. Why do you like those so much? I mean, I guess they work. I can't complain. I mean, I can, but I won't, because they're good. They're good at what they do, and have been continually good at what they've done for 70 years. So full marks where it's due. This is a good diesel that came out of British Railways early in their inception, and that is an achievement that I never thought I'd actually see. And speaking of British rail technology, the London, Midland and Scottish Railway Stanier Class 5, also known as the Black 5, created by William Stanier and built between 1934 and 1951, and they made 842 of these things. That is, of course, not to mention the 852 of the Stanier Class 8Fs, which were the freight version of this same locomotive. The Black 5s were an incredible piece of steam technology. Absolutely, without question, one of the best steam locomotives that the UK has ever delivered. They were efficient, they were fast, they were reliable. Crews loved working on them because they were effectively a combination of every single thing that had been learned about steam technology up until that point, from the country that had invented the things. They were so good, in fact, that they survived quite literally until the last day of steam on British Rail. The Black 5s were so good that even British Rail, that was dead set on getting rid of every steam locomotive on the lines because diesels were so much better, and, you know, everyone was doing that, but British Rail kept making bad diesels. It was kind of annoying when they did it. The Black 5s were the last to go. In fact, the Black 5s made up the majority of the steam locomotives that British Rail was still using at 151. Second place went to their freight version, the 8Fs, at 150. That's right, even British Rail, again, dead set on getting rid of steam, felt the Black 5s were worth keeping around for a significant amount of time. Based on that alone, I'd argue that the Black 5s are bare minimum one of the best, if not the best, steam locomotives that the UK ever made. Which is my opinion as an American. Maybe you disagree. But the point is, they were awesome. And at least 18 are still preserved, some in running condition. And so if you're ever in the UK, you might be able to see one and even ride on one. And that's something. The Union Pacific Big Boy. The Union Pacific Big Boy. Am I biased to put the Big Boy, which only had 25 of it ever produced, over the Black 5 as an American? Is that just me doing that? I mean, these lists are dubious in terms of their order anyway. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. It's just the Big Boy is, well, it's the Big Boy. And honestly, I got called out for not including it in the first part of this, but I tried to avoid it because even I will admit that I like the Big Boy, love the Big Boy. It's an astonishing piece of steam technology. I just think it's a little overrated, and it's probably the most famous American-made steam locomotives ever created, despite being rather few in number. But what Big Boy lacked in quantity, it makes up for in legacy. The Big Boy was, well, big, huge, enormous, and every time it's been in operation, it has held the record for the largest and most powerful operating steam locomotive in the world. And in fact, it reclaimed its title in May of 2019 when Big Boy number 4014 was restored to operational condition by Union Pacific and did some excursion services. And that was immensely successful. Everybody liked that. Okay, everyone liked that. That was awesome. Historically, there has been some debate over the big boy's record standing because some will tell you that the H8 Alleghenies, remember the one that blew up, were actually heavier than the big boy. But according to my sources, that was actually checked by both the manufacturer and the railroad, found that the big boys did outweigh the H8 Alleghenies by, like, a little bit. They were close. Very, very close. Also, historically, I have completely screwed up talking about the big boys every time I have discussed them, which is the other reason why I was hesitant to put them on the list, because I have called these things the wrong thing twice. And that hurts me more than it hurts you. I'm all about facts here. I like to get things right, and when I get it wrong, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. So let's actually, the love of everything, correct my errors of the past. Because the first thing I did, well, it happened when I talked about the triplex locomotive. And I compared it to a big boy, basically explaining, well, that's a duplex locomotive. That's wrong. They are not. Big boys are simple, articulated 4884 steam locomotives. Why is it different from a duplex? Well, because duplexes are not articulated. They're in a rigid frame, whereas the big boy is not like that. So that was wrong. That was the first thing I did. But then I found another source. I'm like, okay, well, what exactly are the big boys? And this source said, they're Malays, which I mispronounced as mallet because I'm an American and there's a T there. I'm sorry. And that's also wrong, because even though Malays are articulated, they utilize a compound steam system, where the main boiler steam is fed to the first set of driving wheels, and then the exhaust steam from those is sent to the other set. The big boy doesn't work like that at all. The big boy is simple, articulated. It just feeds the steam to its wheels. So that was wrong too. I am so sorry to have screwed that up, and I hope now we can move past it, because I am an imperfect creature. And I am sorry, big boy. You deserve better. But like I said, it has received better, because while only 25 were produced, they didn't really need that many of them. These things could pull long, heavy freight trains alone, without any kind of issues. In fact, they were specifically designed to avoid having to double head, namely use more than one locomotive. They just wanted one engine that could do it, and the big boys sure could. But what really sets the big boy apart, I think, from a lot of other steam locomotives is legacy. Everyone knows about the big boy. Even non-rail fans can sometimes acknowledge what a big boy is because it was enormous, it was famous, it stood out, and still stands the test of time. A total of 8 survived in the preservation, including 4014, which is in operation. Especially one of this size, because generally speaking, there's a reason why you don't see a lot of enormous steam locomotives on heritage railways. They're a pain. They take up so much room and they're expensive to run. But because Union Pacific decided to do it themselves, because this was their big baby boy, there's actually a running big boy locomotive out there on the rails. And that's a win for rail fans everywhere, if you ask me. So with that, till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.